What we're doing today is we're doing a brainstorm about how we can fix the global clinical trial registry system. Anyone who's ever been inside a trial registry and has looked at the data there will understand why the system needs to be fixed. It's riddled with inconsistent, incorrect, and out-of-date data. And it really is a problem. It's a problem for medical research, but it's also a problem for patients who are looking for clinical trials to enroll in. So with the current global registry system, really everyone loses out. The question is, how can we improve it? So we've got a wonderful panel today of really leading experts in this. We've got Nicholas DeVito, who created the EU and FDAA trials trackers, which show which institutions and which companies make their clinical trial results public and which ones don't. And he's got experience of extracting data in a systematic fashion from all 17 global clinical trial registries. We've got Perrine Janiot, who is also a registry data user. She was the lead investigator for the COVID evidence database, which drew together all clinical trials involving COVID treatments worldwide and tried to find out how were these trials designed and did they make their results public, and her wider interests are trial methodology and meta-research. We've got Gayatri Sabawa, a trial registry expert who led a comparative study comparing all 17 clinical trial registries globally, trying to identify the strengths and weaknesses of all registries, and she's got a special interest in improving trial reporting in India. We've got Mark Taylor, who chairs the ISR-CTN trial registry based in London, which is on its way to becoming the UK's national registry, you could say. And ISR-CTN is really an innovator and a front runner in sort of transparency prompts amongst trial registries. And Mark Taylor's career has really spanned decades over the UK health research system. We've got Thomas Wicks, who is tasked with entering data into clinical trial registries. He's the head of data at Informa Pharma Intelligence, and his company has been assisting pharmaceutical and medical device companies with reporting the results of clinical trials on registries since 2007. So he's got really broad experience from that perspective. And finally, we've got Deborah Zarin, who used to run the world's largest trial registry, clinicaltrials.gov, at the time when clinicaltrials.gov led the creation of the first summary results template. So it wasn't only about registering clinical trials from that time onward, it was also about making the results public on trial registries. And she's since moved to academia, and her interests now are improving clinical trial design quality and the reporting of clinical trials. So the structure of this event is really simple. First, each of the panelists is going to give a quick pitch of only 2 minutes on one idea of how clinical trial registries can be improved. And after that, we'll have a discussion moderated by Lisa Osipenko from Consilium Scientific. So that's all from me. Nick, over to you. Your 2 minutes, your idea.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I just want to say thanks a lot for having me. This is a really excellent panel. I think I've spoken to every single person on this panel about registry reporting and registries in general before in some capacity. So very excited to be here. So before we go on for spending the next hour talking about what's wrong with the registry system, I just want to say first how really excellent the registry system is. Like it is a great accomplishment that it even exists in the form it exists in, and it really allows a level of transparency and overview of the clinical research environment globally that we really wouldn't have otherwise. And I think it's worth recognizing that that's the case, and that's why we're so interested in making it operate better and more efficiently to serve the purpose it was intended to serve. So we've landed in a situation where various stakeholders, registration is seen as a chore a checkbox, something that needs to be overcome on the road to doing your trial and getting it published in a good journal. And that's really a shame when you think about the value it should hold throughout the entire process of conducting and eventually reporting a clinical trial. And because it's sort of taken on that stigma where it's just become a thing you need to overcome to do at the beginning, we see really poor quality data on the registries, which makes stakeholders further down the line, like journals, take it less seriously as a tool for sense checking and transparency, and then they value it less, which then leads the investigators to value it less and their institutions to value it less, and so on and so forth, and really creates a negative feedback loop that undermines the entire system. So intervening to break that negative feedback loop and ensuring that registries are used in a meaningful way and maintained in a meaningful way throughout that cycle by all the stakeholders within that cycle is really essential. So we've sort of gotten the registration part down. Now we need to get all the other parts of keeping those registries maintained, getting results onto those registries, and ensuring those registries are sustainably funded and can offer a minimum level of functionality across the entire registry system, which is currently definitely not the case across all 17 primary registries, for sure. That's would be sort of my very high level and broad pitch on how to fix the registry system.
Thank you very much, Nick. Perrine, your point of view?
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. Like was mentioned before, I am a registry user. I've dived into the registries through COVID evidence, where we're tracking all COVID-related trials. And in the emergency of the pandemic, we've seen an overwhelming number of trials being registered, and the situation evolved extremely rapidly. And it was really hard to keep track what's planned, what's ongoing, what's completed. And this was due because even in this very short time of period, information was quickly being outdated. And so I was wondering, as a user, there are some registries which make huge efforts as sending reminders email about their starting date, completion date, posting result, but this should be maybe done on a more broad level, maybe at the SCTRP level, at the WHO level, or try to get all registries to do such reminder emails, simple automatic reminder emails. That would be my first point. My second point is consequence of long frustrations dealing with registries, with trials being registered in multiple registries for various different reasons, because of local requirements, but also we've seen with those huge international collaboration with platform trials, adaptive trials being launched through the pandemic, we had multiple registrations within the same registries for the same master protocol. And some of them were extremely hard to track down. It was not that clear. So my question would be, why not trying to work with all the registry? The WHO has put in place a unique trial number. Why not try to have the registry make it a mandatory field within their own registries, so that we can hopefully track those multiple cross-registrations and really answer to the question, how many trials are being initiated? Because it's really hard to know exactly what's going on in a very evolving situation like a pandemic, especially. So that would be my points. Thank you.
Excellent, Perrine. Gayatri, please.
Yeah. So, I'm calling my problem the unsolvable problem. And that is that all of us have done all these studies where we find problems within a record, missing data, wrong data, internally inconsistent data. We find problems between registries for the same record, registry and publication registry and FDA and etc. Now, if you look at it, given the data, around a given trial is in many other locations as well. So each PI, and there may be multiple PIs on a trial, has data, some or all of it. The sponsor has, the ECs or ethics committees have, plus all these other, the registry, the publication, maybe the even preprints, regulator, etc. Now, I know this may not at all be feasible, but is it possible to have one place where everything exists from start to finish? So if I register everything from the protocol to the beginning, from the get-go, putting all the data in one place, and then registries draw down that data to themselves, regulators draw the data from there, because we not only have data everywhere, we also have data being updated or not at different rates in different places. But if there was one place, then everything would be updated there. So, it would probably be impossible to do a comprehensive audit if there was, let's say, a multinational trial or a trial running in, various places, even in one country, to do a comprehensive audit of every place where data related to that trial is. It would be close to impossible, I suspect, because so much of it would be confidential. The ethics committees, the sponsor, the regulator, they may not give us any data. But if there was this one place, which again would have to have controlled access up to a point, and then maybe public access. Maybe it's just science fiction, but I thought I'd put it out there.
Thank you, Gayatri. Now, Mark.
I'd just like to start with a sort of yes, but reply to Gayatri, because I guess our experience in the UK has been that things started moving better when there was good research management, and you start to see information systems joined together so that there's an end-to-end feel about it, and also that the PIs feel as though they are being supported by the research management function in their institution. So it seems to me, as if you like, in each country, that and there's a way forward, but it's a way forward that involves quite a lot of different actors. Now, but so let me turn to my feeling about this, which is that it's not the registry system that needs fixing so much as the research environment around it. And this is if you like, an international version of the same point of view, because the big step forward as far as the UK was concerned was when the Health Research Authority started to link the business of registration and reporting to its responsibility for the interests of the public and patients in reliable research outputs. So that's a question about results being as important as the mechanics of registration. I just said the mechanics of registration were pretty important, but the feeling that this is all about the punchline seems to me to be fundamental to progress with the registry system. And I mean, the US registry is a splendid thing and a gift to the world, but it's really bizarre when you look at the registry movement as an international enterprise, that it's still so reliant on the kindness of the US people. So what I would really like to see is some other champions. I mean, India, for example, a very good example, is of growing importance in vaccine production and all kinds of medicines production, but it still has a regulatory environment which feels about 20 years old, out of date, and it doesn't require a publication of results or data. It's all about disclosure to the regulator. So there's a big step there, it seems to me, and I'd love to see some Indian scientific leaders and preferably politicians championing the public health interest in transparency, both at home and as real partners for the other people at the World Health Organization who have an interest and an understanding in this. And I'm not trying to divert attention from everything that needs doing in the countries that support the regulators who are on the World Health Organization's trusted list. But it just seems deeply unsatisfactory that we don't have the government of India aspiring to have its own regulatory system and its research management join in that international community that promotes transparency in the public interest.
Thank you, Mark. Thomas? Thomas, you're muted.
Thank you. It's hard to come a bit later on in the conversation. I've heard some really good points that I would have loved to have made. Perrine, your idea, for example, of sending out reminders is great. My perspective is a lot on how do we help people engage, support, or submit data to the registries and do so understanding what's required. So some very basic ideas I was thinking, like what could a registry do that costs virtually nothing? One is if everyone could really think through the FAQs and the support materials that they provide. Simple things like some registries are good about providing a list of here are all the data fields you will have to fill in when you register a study or when you disclose results. Each one of those fields with a brief description. Simple things like, is it a regulatory requirement? If so, yes, then link to that, the latest version of the regulation. Often it's not linked or the links are broken, they're out of date. It's just sort of basic things like that. Some essential statistics, the number of trials that are posted, the earliest trial that was posted, things like when did the registry go live, just so we can get a general sense of how far back it goes. And then finally, and this is where it costs perhaps a little bit more of an investment, is making it easier to get data in and for researchers to get data out. Many of the websites, I know some colleagues who do research have to scrape data using sort of essentially hacking the website to scrape the data instead of having a download. ClinicalTrials.gov is an example that does it extremely well. Others do it very poorly. Some even require like codes that you enter before you can see this. It's really sort of, it's public, but you can't use it. That seems insufficient. And then, I'll leave it at that for now. Maybe as the conversation continues, I have quite a list.
Excellent, Thomas. So, Deborah, a difficult position being last, but please go ahead with your comments.
It's good that I'm last because I feel like the grumpy old lady here. I'll just say that between 2005, when I joined clinicaltrials.gov, right before the journal editor's policy took effect, and about 2015, my team and I spent inordinate amount of time going around the world, going to WHO meetings, going to London, meeting with Mark, meeting with ISRCTN folks. People went to Australia, people went to India, all in an effort to prevent the chaos that we see now. The chaos is the direct result of WHO policy, which was to encourage the formation of new registries in different geographic regions around the world. We were trying to argue that this was needless duplication of infrastructure and would lead to world chaos. At one DIA meeting when I was speaking, it got termed Deborah's chaos. They started talking about Deborah's chaos. So the things of, unacknowledged duplicate registrations in multiple registries, all that. It's because there are so many registries that have variable amounts of funding and variable amounts of staffing. And there's no solution. The idea that a unique identifier is going to solve this is actually silly if you think about it. No offense, but the duplicate registrations happen because person A has no idea that person B already registered the trial somewhere else. Or that, if there are multiple PIs, they're not on purpose registering it. If they are registering it in multiple registries and it's the same person doing it, they include the registry IDs. It's a very simple issue to find an NCT number in ISRCTN or to find an ISRCTN number in clinicaltrials.gov. That's not the problem. The problem is when the different investigators or sponsors don't realize that, you know, person A registered it in the Indian registry, and I'm coming here to register it sometimes under a different title with, as you know, different data elements in another registry. So if you didn't know that's happening, you're certainly not going to use the unique identifier. We already have, each registry has a unique identifier. It's easy to link them if they exist. So that's my grumpy preface, which is that we saw this coming, we knew it was going to happen, and it's annoying. Back to some other points though. What can you do now? It's not too late. I mean, the registries could in fact consolidate. There could be, we have old PowerPoints that show how you could divide the world into geographic regions, have primary registries, maybe 3 or 4, sort of like GenBank. So there's GenBank, which has, I think, a registry in the US, in the UK, and in Japan. And every night they exchange data, they collaborate closely, they meet frequently, and you can find gene sequences uniquely. There's not a problem of unacknowledged duplicates, really. Whereas the registry, the world registry system is not like that. So I think the first thing is you need fewer registries or fewer so-called maybe meta registries, or come up with some name that would agree to come up with a way to exchange data and make sure that if a trial is being done in India, then if that's where the coordinating center is or where the sponsor is, then maybe that should be the primary registry. And anyone else who sees that registration should ask for the Indian registry number. It's easy enough. If clinicaltrials.gov sees a trial coming in from Japan, we should be able to ask for that ID number. So that's not that hard. Back to some other issues that Till asked us to address. I agree with Mark Taylor that registries are real. There's a difference between the registry and the policies that encourage or require registration, or the policies that encourage or require results reporting. And it's the sort of holders of those policies that have the leverage, right? So clinicaltrials.gov can only do so much about a sloppy registration. There are rather strict quality control standards at clinicaltrials.gov, but if a sponsor, you know, does something that's not perfect, but barely meets the quality control standards, clinicaltrials.gov can nudge, but really the sponsor can say, we don't care. But what needs to matter is that the journal editors who have their policy care, the FDA that has enforcement power, and NIH that has enforcement power needs to care. The employers, the academic medical centers, as Mark was saying, the research milieu, somebody needs to care if you do a sloppy job registering your trial. And if nobody in your incentive structure, in your research milieu cares, you're going to go the least problematic course and do it sloppy. And registries, there's limit to how much they can do. Now, people like Till and Ben Goldacre and Nick DeVito can call this out. They can have their report cards, they can call it out, which matters somewhat, but they'll all tell you that certain groups still don't care, because in their daily incentive life, nobody cares that they're on the bottom of Nick DeVito's report card. And so you still need research funders, sponsors, academic medical centers to actually care about the quality. I'll stop there, but I can rant on cue anytime.
Excellent points. Thank you very much to everyone for making their introductory comments. This is a call to the audience. Please feel free to put your comments into the chat or put your questions for our experts. So we'll try to address them. But now I would like to hear from you to reflect to each other's points. Maybe you've already started doing this in your responses, but please go ahead if you would like to support or propose any other solutions.
So if I'm just something that Deb said earlier, if that's all right, around the unique identifiers. You know, there's this idea that maybe we need to have a global identifier and then everything would be solved. Even on a more modest scale, if we could at least agree that there's a certain uniqueness that has to be observed with protocol IDs. It's not so much in pharma companies, but I see academic research studies posted which have a running number, 001, 002, 003, and there's a ton of them, or they use a date. because the date of the study start. It's not really that good, because depending on where you're looking, there'll be 60 studies that have the same ID. There's no uniqueness to it at all. So if it could be just some thought paid into a form of GUID, even if it's within the organization, they use the protocol, the first 3 letters of the protocol title, and then 001, anything like that would allow more assurance that we're kind of comparing apples to apples and find those linked studies.
Thomas, I would just interject that I would propose that instead of adding a new unique identifier to the world, if it's in the US, make the NCT number on the front page of your protocol. If it's in the UK, make it the ISRCTN number on the front page of your protocol, and actually use that internally as well as externally.
Yeah, the only thing is some researchers don't, but some studies, depending on where they get posted, it would be great, but even I found people have inconsistent NCT numbers across studies registered in Europe, where they list the NCT number or the UTR-CT number on CTGov. They don't match up in some cases either, so.
Gayatri, please. You're muted.
Yeah, for Dr. Zarin. We once tried to do a mock registration with clinicaltrials.gov. I don't remember why we did. It was just to sort of ask them something. This was a few years ago. And they said, you know, you have your registry in India, so why don't you register there? Now, that's fine. And I think others have also tried and been told the same thing. That's fine. I think right now the number of trial records in clinicaltrials.gov is about roughly 60% of all the 18, 17 plus 1. To your idea of there being 2 or 3 registries globally, you know, it takes a lot, I presume it takes quite a bit of money to, you know, handle, process every record. I know budgets can be increased, but there's always reluctance to do that. So I am fairly pessimistic about the Indian registry. Some of you would have seen it's been in the news recently. They've been threatening to close it down, actually. So I wouldn't expect a huge investment. It may happen, but I doubt it. So if all these other records were to suddenly, you know, someone would request that it be put into clinicaltrials.gov, how do you see them as being receptive to that, given the financial burden? And also, I think a certain, I don't know, I don't know if the sort of motivation to register high quality trials is there. I mean, I see such bad records.
So first of all, I clearly don't speak for the National Library of Medicine. I guess I never did, but I used to pretend to, and now I definitely don't. With that being said, I think the time period when you tried to register, there are plenty of Indian-based trials in clinicaltrials.gov, right? But in an effort to try to organize the world, we did go through a time where we were trying to encourage people to register first, say in India, or first in China, and then carry that ID if you also wanted a clinicaltrials.gov record. That was an effort to help things, not to deter people from registering clinicaltrials.gov. It sounds like it didn't work that way, so I'm sorry about that. From my point of view, when I was at clinicaltrials.gov, doubling, we were getting maybe 500 registrations per week. Doubling that to say 1,000 per week would of course involve more staff because of the quality control issues, but it wouldn't involve a doubling of the budget, right? I mean, the infrastructure is, the IT infrastructure doesn't change. And it seems more efficient globally to have local organizations able to track down the ethics issues, do with education, do support for registration, say. I mean, there were countries like Israel, for example, unbeknownst to us at clinicaltrials.gov at the time, literally passed a law requiring registration in clinicaltrials.gov. And they created a portal that, you know, is an Israeli-based portal. Other countries have since done that. So I don't know about the current people at clinicaltrials.gov, but I think in general, the feeling was the best resource for the world, including for people in the United States, is the most comprehensive resource you can get, just like PubMed takes, journals from anywhere. So I think that that would be a conversation that they would be interested in having. Unfortunately, most of the organizations that have their own registries feel very strongly that they want their own registries for a variety of reasons. Also, people don't want the United States to take over, and I don't blame them, but that would be why have, Australia get a chunk, have places, resources get big chunks, and have other registries maybe feed into them.
Or mirror, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We have a comment from Nick and then and then from Mark, and there's also a very interesting comment in the chat from Judith. So if one of you wants to read it and address that. Nick, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I mean, this whole argument of centralization versus like a decentralized registry system is, I think it's one I've gone back and forth on quite a bit, because I think in an ideal world, the system that Deb is describing probably would be the best. But I mean, it's tough to see what that world looks like where with the role clinicaltrials.gov plays. And by the way, like, it's difficult to see that happening when clinicaltrials.gov couldn't even become like a primary registry in the system we have now, even though I know that might be a distinction without a ton of meaning.
It's not that it couldn't.
It did. You're right, it didn't.
It didn't.
Yeah.
I mean, so, partly because it didn't believe that the WHO approach actually made sense.
Yeah, and so, like, when you look at some of the countries that did decide to create their own registry infrastructure, right? It's places like China and India, China and Iran that might have like distinct reasons of not wanting to rely on US infrastructure, which you mentioned, Deb. You said there's a lot of reasons for this. But I think we also just have to recognize that on the data, there's obviously the collection of all the registries that form the primary registries and the steering committee at that level, which Mark is involved in and stuff. But the day-to-day operations of the ICTRP are, from my understanding, pretty much one guy, like in Geneva.
One guy who wasn't full-time the last time I checked.
Yeah, so
it's amazing, but it's like not right.
So like there was like this big, and this is something when I was doing a lot of the background research for my thesis, right? There was this big groundswell throughout the from sort of the 80s through the 2000s, and all this advocacy and all this work and this collective action that went into creating the system that we have now. And then once we got there, and it's sort of like we hit the ICMJE statement, and that sort of, I think, formed a peak. Maybe that and the FDA Amendments Act sort of formed a mini peak. And I feel like it's been, a lot of people went like this and said, oh, great, we solved that whole trials transparency thing. What's the next thing? When there was far from it. So I think like only global concerted, passionate effort from the people who were involved like we had that got us here could lead to that again. Could fix this situation in the end, and that involves like a massive redirection of resources and rethinking of how we do things in one way or another.
Mark, your comments, and you also have a question from Till.
Well, quickly, first of all, I'd like joint billing with Deborah as for being responsible for the chaos, because but I think we have to recognize the political obstacles. There was a point when we wondered whether it would make sense more or less to merge or put the ISRCTN registry under the same management as the US registry, but in the end, mostly for what reason of political nervousness, we didn't. And when you come to the European Union, where one would have thought that we might be able to act together, I don't think that the damage to the registry system was the decisive point in the UK's decision to leave the European Union and withdraw from the European mechanisms for the regulation of medicines and devices. I mean, so somehow we have to find a way of prioritizing and for the collaboration around improvements to hold the registry system together and make it work as a worldwide enterprise. I mean, recognizing that probably it would be a wonderful thing if we, say, had a Pan-African registry that other people could collaborate with, because there's a very, I think, a serious difficulty if we have some registries which are relatively well funded and others which are trying to operate on almost nothing. Whatever you say to those registries about sharing technical measures and solutions with them, they're hardly likely to be able to accept. So we need a way of working which takes some of the thinking away. I'm sorry, I won't go on any longer. That's enough, really.
Thank you very much. These are very interesting suggestions, and looks like there's no an easy solution to this, but we are talking very much about the future. But we currently have a mess of decades of registered trials, which are very hard to make sense of for research purposes. For example, even 20 years from now, trials which are right now duplicates and they're in a system poorly filled with poor quality data, they will remain the problem even if we find an ideal solution in 5 years. What are your thoughts in terms of forward-thinking solutions to solutions perhaps dealing with what we already have? Hundreds of thousands of records will hit the million pretty soon, at least at clinicaltrials.gov, and then we're probably over 1 million across all the registries in any case. So any comments, any thoughts on the retrospective fixing?
I have thoughts on real-time fixing. So this is what at least clinicaltrials.gov had been trying to do, and I don't know the status now, is that if a trial comes in, and again, if you see an Indian connection or a Canadian connection or a UK connection, to make sure to ask. So we asked people to list other trial identifiers, but there's no way to enforce that because, of course, you don't know for sure that they have another trial identifier. But you can guess that, given that you know the policies in India, that if it's a trial that's, that's centered in India, that they must have registered in the Indian registry. So you could then insist, if each trial registry would try harder to get what are likely identifiers from other registries for any trial. So if you got a trial from the US, you should ask for the NCT number, because once you have those numbers, then it's an informatics problem that's very solvable, right? You can link those up. So that's one thing to do, and it does take staff to do it, because that's just having an automated message saying please give us any other registry numbers leads to the situation we have now. So you have to go the next step of saying no, I know you must have an Indian registry number. Like, can you please go find it? So.
Thank you very much. Any other comments on potential retrospective solutions or current time reflections to Deborah's point?
When I start working with new companies, what I'll often do is look at some of the registrations they've done in the past and just run simple reports. For example, if you look at data on UDRA-CT, just as an example, it's one I just did recently, you can find a slew of studies that were registered 10, 15 years ago, and you can see how long the sponsor thought the study would run. So it'll tell you 1 year and 3 months. And then what I do is I take that, I double it, because nothing ever runs to plan. And then I say, it says that you thought you would end this study in 2009, and it's still showing as active. And just maybe it's time to clean that up, unless something really happened, but at least you get a candidate list of likely nonsense. I think that's a fairly simple analysis that any registry should be able to do, is look at when was the study registered and is it likely that it's still ongoing, to start cleaning some of that up. Nick, I'm sure you have.
Yeah, so I've done the exact same thing, Thomas. I'm just wrapping up a study that I'm hoping to publish soon, where I did basically almost that exact thing, and using the EU UDRA-CT, EU CTR data. And I mean, thinking retrospectively and fixing, right? Like some of that stuff is lost forever, right? The PI is dead, and there's no records or whatever, right? There people just are not, there's someone who doesn't even work in clinical research anymore, who has no interest, and you can't force them to care, right? All these reasons where you might not, the login was lost forever. But what you can do is start caring a lot moving forward, right? And that's what you can do. That's where you get to things like journal editors, not simply looking, and this, you know, helps with some but not all trials, but journal editors looking at a register, they require that you register. That checks a box. Why not the natural next step, which is to say, does what's in this trial report you're sending me right now match what's on the registry? And if it doesn't, it needs to before we publish this. It seems like a natural next step, but we've never taken that next step, and it doesn't seem like anyone's very interested at the moment in taking that next step. Or a university, right, recognizing that that they are under like a legal obligation to report, right? If it wasn't for TIL, half the universities in Europe wouldn't even know that they had to report like the trials to the EUCTR still. And it's only by, you know, him adapting the work we've done in his Herculean effort to like raise that awareness that we've started to see real progress on that, right? And so like why did it have to be that way? And what were the failures and what can we learn? So it's a lot about learning from what happened retrospectively and probably acknowledging that a lot of what's wrong retrospectively is probably irredeemably messed up. We can do some, but we can't do all. And making sure we get it right moving forward really should be the priority.
Do you think the biggest problem is that we left this registration of clinical trials to an individual, to a person, the PI, the representative of the company? So actually hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of people doing this, and this is one of the reasons that we have a mess. Would that be better if it was a designated person or group or team entering the data and saying, we cannot register your trial because you haven't supplied this, this, and this. And this team would be following up everyone. I mean, of course, you can say this is hugely expensive, but we tried to go down the cheap route, and but it didn't work like eBay. It didn't work like Amazon. It created, unfortunately, this kind of very, very difficult situation. Any comments on that, and can we reverse this at this point?
Just to say quickly before we hand it over to—
That's what Thomas does for companies.
Yeah.
I mean, it is, that's what,
But,
so.
and others are moving, and I mean, I've researched this, TIL has written up like this, some people are moving to that method, but it's very ad hoc, and it's very like, did we get a naughty letter from the government, like sort of that we didn't do this right, that's causing us to make these changes. And that's only in the places where people are campaigning on this effortlessly, like in Europe and in somewhat the US. You get to some of these other places, and I'd love to hear, you know, perspectives from like India and stuff on what this looks like. You know, there was just a preprint a few days ago about how all these Dr. Reddy's, I believe, published all these registered all these mono peer-reviewed studies for COVID in the Indian registry, and they can't find any. They can't get any information on what happened to these studies, and they're covering thousands of patients on an active treatment that is being given to hundreds of people, to thousands of people across the globe for COVID right now, preliminarily. So yeah, I would really be interested to hear, especially even Gayatri's perspective on that.
Gayatri, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. So multiple things. One is, you know, what Anthony Keyes has done at Johns Hopkins. If you could have a nodal person like that, you know, in other institutions or even for groups of institutions, if the trial density is not that high, that would be great. In India, I suspect that such a person may not be treated very well by the medical community. We tend to be extremely hierarchical, especially amongst doctors. So I don't know how well that would work. No, I just wanted to mention, you know, the idea that journals should sort of catch this, and the reviewers should catch this. So I think there was a study, I'm sure you know this person, I'm forgetting who it is, but where false maybe NCT IDs or something were put into the papers. Those weren't really genuine. So it's almost like I have to put in a number, I put in a number, I may not even put in the correct number. you know. But then I was talking to a medical doctor, quite overwhelmed with his volume of work, and he was so fed up because the journals, and I think it was a foreign journal, was asking him to go back and check the registry. He said, you know, they pay me an honorarium, let them not pay me an honorarium, let them check everything there and just not ask me to do it. And he wasn't trying to belittle the fact that this data has to be accurate. He was just overwhelmed with work, you know. So I think in different ways, so the Anthony Keys kind of thing, solution seems to me, at least reading what he's done, that you've got a dedicated team, they're building up sort of SOPs, they're sharing that with others. At least from this distance, it would work for some. I don't know if it would work in every situation.
You know, when we were first developing the data elements and working with them, the assumption was that this would be an administrative task because the information would be clearly laid out in a trial protocol. And so if the trial protocol really had the information clearly, then a, say, lower level, even non-scientific person could probably extract it and put it in the registry. And that's how it was kind of marketed to begin with. And what we all found out during this whole process is that trial protocols are quite deficient. And the registration record is supposed to be a summary of key facts from the protocol, but frequently you can't find those key facts in the protocol, or they're contradictory in various parts. You know, if you try to find a primary outcome measure in a protocol, you could find evidence for 6 different primary outcome measures, you know, depending on where you look. And so that's, again, a research quality, research milieu issue, where this was the first, I talk about this as a sausage factory. It turns out that trials are being run based on really poor protocols, or poorly described protocols for sure. And probably, honestly, you have to go back to that source. You can hire all the people you want, but if I've had PIs who are NIH funded who couldn't tell me how many arms were in their study. I mean, because they just don't even conceptualize it that way. So all of the user help you're going to give them isn't going to get to a reliable registry record, because it turns out their study was really poorly conceptualized and or poorly documented. So unfortunately, I don't think, again, this can be solved easily at the registry level. It starts before that, when the protocol is being written and approved.
Thomas, please.
Yeah, when it came to, I think Nick and Till will agree, there's been a lot of work done on the industry side. That's not to say especially small industry sponsors couldn't do a better job, because there's a direct correlation between company size and compliance with disclosure requirements. But on the investigator-initiated side, what I think often causes a mess is that it'll be Dr. DeVito is running a trial, but doesn't necessarily indicate within what institution, because ultimately, especially in the States, it's the institution that's on the hook, but there may be no mention of it. So there's a lot of professors and doctors running trials and no sense what institution they are affiliated with, what hospital they're affiliated with. So when they leave, there's no one there to clean up these trials. So back to what Nick was saying earlier, and maybe also at the beginning, Perrine, about reminding people, that only works as long as the person's still in that institution, and then things go away. There needs to be some kind of follow-up mechanism. And I think that's a simple thing would be to require that you indicate what institution do you work for, or what company, to get away from those mistakes.
Thank you. I have a high-level question for you. We mentioned this briefly, but and Deborah, perhaps this comes from what you've been saying in the beginning. Who should be in charge? Can there be one regulator to whom people respect, whom people be afraid of, who can clean things up? Because once again, this distributed system, on one hand, there was some logic behind it, but it led to a mess. So local regulation does not work. And decentralized regulations seems to fail. So anything we can do at that level. What role should WHO play?
So for WHO to play a role, as I said before, right, they would need to rethink their participation in this entire system. And if they want to take a leadership role, they need to fund it like they care about taking that leadership role, and not simply host the ICTRP, which is one guy, like, who runs a, like, you know, like a registry system that's built, as far as I can tell, like technologically on like gum and glue, you know, basically is the ICTRP meta registry. Like, you know, you could invest in real IT infrastructure. You could invest in a, like, you know, Till was saying in the chat earlier, where would it be technically feasible to have a centralized backend? Like, yeah, right, we could potentially have like a minimum registration data standard that could work at every registry. So therefore, if you did have to register at the EU registry and the US registry for regulatory reasons, you could just fill out one thing and send it to both registries. But once again, that requires the registries to be in accordance about what they want to collect, how they want to collect it, and then subsequently, like, because if you, they all basically have the same information at a base level. They have the ICTRP minimum data set standard, or they should at least. Even that's not, you know, fully implemented as well as it should be everywhere. But like, there's no reason it couldn't be, right? There's no reason we couldn't have a technical data entry standard that works cross registries. But the thing is it's like that, even that requires a whole thing, because let's say we did that, let's say we got that together, you know, who, I don't know, you know, the who at the Indian Clinical Trial Registry is going to adapt the Indian Clinical Trial Registry to be able to accept the standard registration format, right? It creates so like maybe the thing is if you don't do that, you just shouldn't be a registry anymore. But I don't know if that's an acceptable political or logistical answer, right? You know, that's where you start to, every single answer you run into these hurdles that's created by the current system we have. And it's just really rethinking it fundamentally, all these cool things that we could do with sort of modern digital standards and things like that would need to probably like start from some measure of scratch based from what we have now, I think, right? It'd be very difficult to adapt what we have now into that like digital utopian sort of view. And even that's not even what I want to say, because we don't need utopia to do better than we have now, but just, you know, thinking about it in sort of idealistic and ideal terms.
Can I just, one suggestion, rather than a controlling global body, what seems to have worked the best recently is peer pressure. So there's the really valuable work that Till and Nick and everyone is doing around the EU trials track or the VIDA trials track, of reminding academic institutions of their obligations, good pharma scorecard in the States. Those are all commendable, but it's also industry associations like Pharma, FPIA have done a lot. ABPI in the UK has done a lot. The academic working group in the States, I think the members of that, by and large, are doing much better than they used to. And maybe that's kind of how a lot of this is done, that it becomes normative behavior. Maybe for an academia, you need to show evidence that you've done things properly when you're applying for new positions, or if you're trying to get funding from wherever it is, you have to show that your past research was properly disclosed. I think that's probably going to be more effective, because it gets away from politics and it gets away from that.
Thank you, Thomas. Very, very good comment. So, Mark?
I just wanted to bring something up from the UK experience, which is partly encouraging and partly not. I mean, that there is a combined review process which works between our Health Research Authority and the medicines regulator nowadays. So there's a harmonization of what they require to know in order to sign off studies, clinical trials of that kind. But I mean, Deborah and I can remember that the WHO data set was cooked up by a small bunch of people with violently, who agreed violently with over a long period before they managed to turn the data set into words. And it's been relatively stable, but so far as I know, there isn't, for example, a working group of the WHO list of favored regulatory bodies, which has decided that the registration data set is the same as what they need to know for their regulatory purposes. I mean, that's one example. Also, I don't think that any consensus about needing precisely that information is present among the funders of this kind of research in any country. And I mean, I don't know whether we've got any French colleagues with us, but they've kind of bucked out of it by saying, go and register with clinicaltrials.gov. But I'm not sure whether there again is any link between what you're required to tell clinicaltrials.gov and what you're required to tell the French equivalent of a human research ethics committee. It's that kind of, I know I'm going on a bit too much about this, but it's that kind of detail that makes the whole process tiresome and in some cases defeating for poorly resourced research teams. And especially if they don't have the money to keep somebody on the payroll who's going to develop any expertise in this kind of thing. So they just, you have the most junior person of the team who knows nothing about it, dipping in and out of this kind of stuff every so often. I mean, that's where you really lose quality. Sorry, that's enough.
Thank you, Mark. Unfortunately, we're out of time. If anyone has a final comment to make. My final comment is that I think we just started and there is so much that needs to be discussed, and pretty much every sentence you pronounced can be depicted in a 1-hour discussion. So Till, looking at you, I hope we'll be able to continue this theme. Lots of unresolved issues, lots of very interesting questions and comments. So let's treat this session as opening the can of worms, and hopefully we can keep not just talking about it, but perhaps coming up with proactive solutions and making a difference at the policy level through people who can make the change and who are currently working on this, many of whom are you. So thank you very much, everyone.